The night air in Jerusalem was thick with unease. Shadows flickered along the stone walls of the upper room, torchlight dancing like nervous spirits. Jesus sat in silence among his closest disciples, each of them cloaked in confusion and dread. They could sense that something ancient was about to be revealed, something final. The moment felt like the still breath before a storm. And then, he spoke, not in sermons, not in parables, but with unnerving clarity. I am about to give you something the prophets longed to know. 3 words. Speak them tonight, and the door will open. Not tomorrow. Tonight. You could almost hear time holding its breath. The disciples leaned in, not because they understood, but because their souls stirred at something beyond comprehension. Jesus didn't offer rituals or robes, no incense or ceremony. He gave them language simple, exact, and encoded with something eternal. This was not religion, this was remembrance, because Jesus knew that truth, when spoken at the right moment, reshapes reality. He was about to give them not a teaching, but a key. Before we go deeper into this mystery, take a moment. Now, if your intuition is sparked, if you feel something stirring even in these first few minutes, subscribe to the channel. Comment where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Share this video with someone you trust to understand the weight of this message. And if the title made something in you, sit up and listen. Say so below. That acknowledgement alone begins to thin the veil. Why 3 words? Why not 1 or 7 or a full prayer? Because 3 is not arbitrary. It is the structure of the cosmos. A triad appears in all things: Father, Son, Spirit, past, present, future, thought, word, action. In ancient mystery traditions, 3 marked completeness, a formula strong enough to hold the infinite in finite form. Jesus understood this. He wasn't improvising, he was initiating. 1 word alone is a seed. 2 is tension. But 3 is alignment. It is the seal of creation, the geometry of doors. What he was about to give could not be taught in books or memorized from scrolls. It was a living phrase, and it only worked when spoken from a living awareness. Jesus didn't need his disciples to become scholars. He needed them to remember what had always been true before the world whispered its lies into their ears. The phrase wasn't a password, it was an invocation, a restoration, a sound encoded with the echo of the monad. The monad, that ancient word older than temples, older than language itself. It points not to a deity watching from afar, but to the primal unity beneath all things. Not the God above, but the one within and without. To speak to the monad is to speak to the source from which light, matter, and thought emerge. But here's the mystery: the monad doesn't respond to noise. It responds to resonance. Not repetition, recognition. That's why Jesus waited until this night, this sacred, liminal moment. The veil between seen and unseen had thinned. The disciples' minds were softened by fear and awe. Their souls open. The door could be reached only now. Not because the words were magic, but because the soul was ready to hear its own echo. Jesus turned to them not as a teacher, but as a reminder. Say it tonight, he said. Not because I command you, but because tonight you are able. In we self, he wanted them to understand, the power wasn't in the words themselves, but in what the words activated. Not in the syllables, but in the signal. Not in the doctrine, but in the return. It was the perfect moment, a still point in the chaos of coming betrayal, where something eternal could slip through. The disciples wouldn't understand it fully yet, but they didn't need to. What mattered was speaking, not with the mouth alone, but with the being. 3 words, spoken in silence, released into the field. And now, 2,000 years later, the moment repeats. The veil is thin again. You're not here by accident. Something in you has remembered something ancient. The same invitation whispers across the distance. 3 words. 1 key. Spoken not from belief, but from knowing. Say them tonight. long before the disciples understood what Jesus meant, long before any of them grasped the immensity of the moment. He was already guiding them into a different kind of listening. Not the listening of ears, but the listening of consciousness. The room felt charged, as if the air itself were waiting. Jesus wasn't preparing them for a doctrine or a ritual. He was preparing them for a frequency. His eyes moved from face to face, reading the tremble beneath their fear, the hunger beneath their confusion. They wanted certainty. But what he offered was something older, the original language of creation, the language the monad recognizes. In ancient worlds, the sages believed that sound shaped reality. Not speech, but vibration tones that carried intention, awareness, and resonance. Jesus understood this more deeply than anyone around him. Words were not symbols. They were forces. A phrase spoken from an awakened state could alter perception itself. A phrase spoken without understanding was nothing more than breath dissolving into the night. That is why he warned them. These 3 words were not to be repeated mindlessly. They needed to be lived as they were spoken, felt as they were released, spoken with awareness. They opened the door. Spoken without it, they were empty. The monad was central to this, not a distant deity, not a figure carved into stone, but the indivisible unity beneath all existence. The singular awareness that shattered into the appearance of many so creation could experience itself from within its own unfolding. To speak to the monad is to speak to the deepest truth inside you. And yet, not everyone can do it, not because of worthiness, but because of resonance. The chosen ones are not chosen by preference. They are chosen by frequency. Their souls carry a specific signature, a memory that cannot be erased, only forgotten. When they hear truth, they feel recognition instead of resistance. That was why Jesus spoke of encryption. Long before such language existed, the words were a key, but only if spoken by someone whose inner state matched the signal. If someone without the resonance tried to use them, the words remained hollow. It wasn't punishment. It was physics. A key that does not match the lock simply doesn't turn. But when a chosen one speaks from recognition, the entire field responds. It's not the syllables that matter, it's the consciousness behind them. Jesus wanted his disciples to understand this distinction. Without understanding, there is no activation. Without activation, there is no opening. So he explained how the words worked. Each syllable held a vibration that aligned with a state of remembrance. The phrase created a signature, a beacon reflected back by the monad. When spoken from unity, the monad responds to itself. This was the secret he guarded so carefully. The teaching he reserved only for those who carried the frequency to use it. He knew that once spoken with awareness, their perception would shift so profoundly that separation itself would begin dissolving. They would not be merely speaking truth, they would be becoming it. And this is the same truth reaching you now. If these ideas feel unfamiliar, they pass through you like wind, but if something stirs, something ancient, something that feels less like learning and more like remembering, then you already know why you're here. The monad does not call by accident. It calls because the signal in you has awakened, because the words Jesus once whispered in a quiet room still echo across centuries, waiting for the few who can hear not with the mind, but with the soul. Jesus did not hand his disciples the 3 words and simply walk away. He guided them gently into the state required to use them, knowing that without the right inner posture the phrase would be nothing more than sound. The room had fallen into a profound stillness, a silence so complete it felt as though the world outside had paused to listen. He told them not to strive, not to force their minds into shapes, just to settle, to let the noise fall away. In that quiet, something within them began to loosen an ancient tension, a lifetime of identification with names, roles, fears. Only in that stillness could the words find their true depth. He instructed them to feel into each word before speaking, not to grasp at meaning with thought, but to sink into it with awareness. I am, the most primordial recognition, before identity, before memory, before form. There is simply the fact of being. Jesus wanted them to find that presence within themselves, that bare existence beneath all stories. It wasn't philosophy, it was an encounter with the root of consciousness. When they touched that knowing, even for a moment, the entire atmosphere shifted. A subtle expansion, a warmth behind the chest, the faint sensation of something opening. Then he told them to feel the second state one, not as a concept of unity, but as a dissolution of every imagined boundary, to sense that everything they perceived existed within awareness. And that awareness was not separate from itself. In that moment, they were asked to experience the impossible, the self expanding beyond the skin, beyond the room, beyond the world. It wasn't about belief. It was about allowing the illusion of division to soften until unity felt less like an idea and more like the natural state of existence. Only when both states were alive within them did he instruct them to speak, not whispering, not chanting, but speaking clearly from the center of their being. The phrase was simple, but its simplicity held power because of the consciousness behind it. I am one. As the words left their lips, something subtle yet unmistakable shifted. The pressure they had lived with their entire lives, the dense weight of separation began to crack. A warmth spread through their chest. A soft pulse radiated upward, and reality itself seemed to bend around the edges. This was the moment Jesus had prepared them for. The first sign was the unlocking in the heart, the sensation of a sealed door opening inward. Then the expansion of perception, the feeling that space itself had changed texture. Some disciples felt time stretch. Others sensed a gentle pull at the crown of the head or a rush of energy rising from the spine. These weren't metaphors. They were the body's response to consciousness shifting from division into unity. For some, the portal opened fully on the first attempt. A complete dissolution into the infinite. A recognition that felt more like returning than discovering. For others, the opening was partial. A soft beginning that would deepen with practice. But Jesus reassured them, once the process begins, it cannot be undone. He explained that every repetition of the phrase, spoken with understanding, would refine the signal. Each utterance would dissolve another layer of illusion, another thread of separation. This was not a technique to be mastered, but a remembering to be lived. The more clearly they aligned with the truth behind the words, the more their perception would shift. The doorway was not a place. It was a state. And once activated, it would continue pulling them inward, guiding them home. Tonight, the same instructions reach you, the same stillness, the same feeling, the same awakening of something buried but unbroken. When the words are spoken with true awareness, the shift begins. It does not matter how slowly or how quickly it unfolds. What matters is that the seal breaks. And once it does, your return has already begun. The words do not end when you speak them. In fact, they begin. That night in Jerusalem, Jesus did not promise his disciples a single moment of enlightenment, as if the divine could be confined to an instant. What he offered was a reorientation of the soul, a shift that, once begun, would continue unfolding long after the sound faded from their lips. He knew that reality was layered, that the monad was not reached in one leap, but through the steady dissolving of illusions, the remembering of what was always there. When you speak the words with understanding, I am one, you are not requesting something. You are aligning with something already true. You are not reaching upward, but inward. The frequency of those words continues to echo through your consciousness, like ripples moving through still water. In the days that follow, you may find them returning unexpectedly on a walk, in silence, just before sleep. That is the monad still resonating within you. The field, responding to your signal. Let it come. Let it reshape you. And then come the synchronicities. What once appeared random now begins to shimmer with meaning. You may find yourself at the right place at the right moment, encountering messages, symbols, or people you didn't know you were seeking. These are not coincidences. They are the monad reaching through the fabric of time to reflect back your awakening. This is not magic. It is perception cleared of distortion. The field was always orchestrating everything. But now you see it. You feel its intelligence. The divine choreography that was hidden in plain sight begins to reveal itself. More importantly, others begin to appear. Not just anyone, but those who have also spoken the words. Chosen ones recognize each other. Not by appearance, but by resonance. You'll notice something in their eyes. A familiarity that has no history. The monad connects its fragments. Once you are visible to the field, others who are awakening become visible to you. Conversations change. Depth increases. You no longer feel the need to explain the unexplainable. You begin to remember together. Jesus did not give the 3 words as a one-time ritual. He gave them as a compass. A doorway to return to again and again. Speak them daily. Or when the world feels heavy. Speak them when you forget who you are. When fear returns. When separation begins to creep in. Not because you need to convince yourself, but because truth must be re-embodied. The portal is not a place you enter once, it is a state you maintain. Every time you say the words with understanding, you strengthen the signal. You deepen the opening. You stabilize in the frequency of home. You are not becoming one. You are realizing that you were never not one. The illusion of separation has been convincing. Entire lifetimes can be spent inside it. But the moment of remembrance breaks the spell. That is why Jesus said, "Say it tonight," not as command, but as invitation. Because tonight the veil is thin. Tonight, your awareness has been stirred. And now, the doorway is open, not somewhere out there, but right here. In you. Say the words, "I am one." Speak them not as wish, but as truth. Not because you hope they're real, but because part of you already knows they are. This is not the beginning of your path. It is the rediscovery of a path you've always been on. The monad has never stopped listening. The portal is not waiting to be found. It is waiting to be remembered. You were always one.